Does a fountain pen perform any better with an ink from the pen manufacturer than with another ink of the writer's choosing? All right, this is a really good question. I get asked this a lot, partly because there are several pen companies out there, pen manufacturers, that also make their own ink, and they will say some kind of language that says you should only use our ink with our pens. Something like that. Some companies are much firmer about it than others. Others, it's more of just kind of a recommendation, but basically it's kind of like a CYA term that's used for their warranty purposes. So when they make their pens, they test them out with the inks that they also carry, and they know that their pens work well with their inks, so they say you should use our inks with our pens. Now, some people will say, well, they're just trying to sell more of their ink. Okay, maybe that's the case. I'm sure they're kind of thinking that's not a terrible thing. In terms of like how much pen companies focus on their ink instead of their pens, I really don't believe that that's probably the case for most pen companies, because the amount of ink and the amount of, you know, whatever revenue you want to call it they would get from their ink is going to be relatively minor compared to their pens. I think it's probably much more of a reason for you know, having an element of control from a warranty standpoint of what ink is put into those pens, so they know they're not going to get pens coming back with, like, you know, glue or something in it. You know, not glue, but, you know, some kind of term like this. So like there's different inks that you can use out there. As long as you're using a fountain pen ink, you're pretty safe. It's when you get into like other types of ink, like calligraphy ink and stuff like that, and you might be surprised, but I definitely get some people that don't know the difference between fountain pen and calligraphy ink, like shellac-based calligraphy ink, and if you go putting that stuff in a pen and then it doesn't write well and you send it back to the manufacturer, they're going to say, well, you used some kind of crazy ink, you should have used the ink that we told you to use, blah, blah, blah. And then you'll get charged because you weren't going within their warranty. Now, that said, if you're using a fountain pen ink, which every ink that we carry at gouletpens.com is a fountain pen ink, safe for fountain pens. Some inks are higher maintenance than others, and there are some pens that have more of a propensity for staining and stuff like that with certain types of inks that have some rather extreme properties. For example, you wouldn't want to use a like Noodler's cellulose reactive permanent ink on like a vintage celluloid pen, because it's a cellulose-based pen, it could stain it. It's not going to, you know, destroy the pen, but it's going to stain it. So you would want to know that if you're using like a specific type of pen. In general, if you're using a modern fountain pen and you're putting modern fountain pen ink in it, you're going to be pretty okay. You may, if it's an ink that has some rather unusual properties to it, you may want to read up a little bit on it, read some reviews, just kind of check it out a little bit. You can shoot us an email, info@gouletpens.com. If you have any questions about it, you can post in the comments here. We'll try to help you out for anything specific. But in general, should you use a manufacturer's ink in their pen, or like as you asked it, will it perform any better? The answer is maybe, but probably not. You know, most of the inks that come from pen makers, for example, like Lamy, Waterman, Schaefer, Visconti, Pilot, you know, most of those are going to be pretty conventional inks. The ones that have more extreme properties are coming from boutique ink companies like Noodler's, you know, Diatramentis, you know, Diamine, some of those. That they don't make their own pens, they just do ink. So you're going to see some more extreme properties because they're trying to push the envelope a little bit, whereas pen companies tend to be pretty safe with the inks they put out. So yeah, the inks will perform generally well, but there's a lot of other inks that are made from different companies that will work just as well, or if not perhaps better even, depending on what it is you're actually trying to achieve with your ink. That will come from another company, especially if you're using like one pen company's ink to another pen company's pen. You know, it'll be pretty darn interchangeable. It's really not as extreme as it might seem by some of the language that's out there. So you just have to know kind of a little bit about it, and I've now educated you maybe a little bit more, Kevin, that in general should pretty well cover it. But I will say that there are like some pens and some inks that just tend to like not play well together. Some that's like a little, if you got a dry writing pen, you put a dry writing ink in there, it might be too dry and cause skipping issues. So you might want a wetter ink for that pen, and so on. So there's things like that to take into consideration, but in general, talking about like a whole brand name kind of thing, it's not going to be as like night and day as you might expect.